Good morning, dear friends. It is Wednesday, the 6th of August 3rd, and we're here to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Believe it or not, we are Masechah Shabbos, chapter 18, page 129a. We closed out yesterday with a discussion about bloodletting and how essential it is to, to eat? Is that what we said? No, to be warm. How essential it is to be in a warm environment in order to properly heal from the bloodletting. We have people here that have medical degrees. I don't believe that bloodletting today is a prevalent therapy, but in times past, bloodletting apparently was an extremely prevalent, perhaps the most common and suggested medical therapy, let's say, and the science of the time, which also had other post-treatment care. And one of the essential points that the Gemara is saying here is that you need to be kept warm. Now, today, I don't think most conventional, contemporary, conventional medicine promotes bloodletting, but we do have blood donation.
Bloodletting, Rabbi? What does that mean, bloodletting?
In times past, you would go to your barber, I think, and they would assist you in letting out. They would literally, I guess, they have a suction and draw blood out. And I think the idea was, I may be wrong, that your body, and this is not true, that your body replenishes the blood supply. So it was good for a person to activate or to cause themselves to replenish and have fresh blood. I think was understood to have been advantageous. It was known to cure almost every medical problem known to mankind. Now, I wouldn't be surprised.
To let out blood is healthy?
Hold on.
He killed Washington by using bloodletting excessively.
And he got infected, right? Or something as a result. So I wouldn't be surprised. And again, I'm totally ignorant in this regards. If there are actual scientifically proven medical benefits to letting blood, maybe I'm wrong. I wouldn't be surprised if there are some potential benefits, but as the professor pointed out, I think today we might have better, you have a headache, there might be a better suggestion than letting blood. Maybe take a Tylenol, aspirin. But once upon a time, that was a common medical intervention, and people did it all the time. And the Gemara shows that there are many that when a person has their bloodlet, they are weaker. And there are many things that were done to help the person replenish and regain koyach. Now, I will say, when I lived in Brooklyn, they had a truck that would go around for blood donations, or they would have these pop-ups, run by Hatzalah or run by the different local organizations. And I would donate blood as frequently as I could. I figured Hashem gave me the gift of blood that replenishes, and maybe someone else needs it. I was always happy to be able to donate blood. And yes, there's a concern that you have to have some sugar or whatever to replenish, to have koyach, and they tell you to take it easy, not to go dancing that night or whatever else they tell you to do, till your body replaces and replenishes the blood supply. So that's what we're talking about. That's what we're going to be talking about today, at least the first segment of today. Going to be about different Talmudic best practices around bloodletting, in addition to being kept warm by the fire, maybe by the sun. And we'll talk about a whole series of other issues. I just hit mute but once again extend a sincere invitation. I hope everyone will unmute to continue the conversation, especially if you have something to add or to challenge or to question. That's always very welcome, and it's what makes our shir tick. I do want to say that tonight and tomorrow will be the yard site of a special Jew in our community. Mr. Peter Seil was our gabbai for many years. He was a Holocaust survivor, and although our shul has and had many Holocaust survivors, he played a special role in connecting those that were in shul or those that would become in contact with him with the memories of times past. He had the blessing of a very clear recall of interesting details of his childhood pre-war. And I actually had the privilege well, I would speak to him and visit him a lot, but when he was in the final months, he was already less well and he was home more, and I would visit him. He once was describing to me the town square of his childhood shtetl. And I said, Mr. Peterseil, we can go to the computer, go to Google Maps, and we could zoom in. And he described exactly different landmarks and streets. And we were able to zoom in and find the town square. Things had changed, but a lot hadn't. And we were actually able to show him on Google Maps his old shtetl, his old town, where the square was. Of course, the most tragic facet of the story is that was a town that was majority Jewish, and today it's not the case. I think the shul in that town was preserved or was purchased back after the war and does preserve, it was preserved as a shul, if I'm not mistaken. But anyways, so his yard site is tomorrow, and so we'll dedicate tomorrow's learning to him, but I just wanted to share that. Now, before we go to the Gemara, I'm going to share the screen, and I want to show you a half-baked presentation that I made for yeshiva night, and I'm going to work on it and we'll get it better. But it has to do with a question that was raised in our share. Someone here asked, I think it was the professor, but I don't recall, a question about Shabbos observance and Mars. I don't remember how it came up or why it came up, but it is an interesting question. How can and would certain facets of Judaism be observed in outer space or in another planet? Or the next question, of course, would be in another solar system. Why is this such a question? Well, it is a question because much of Jewish practice is calendar-centric and Zmanim-centric. It's connected to daytime, nighttime, sunrise, sunset, etc. So what do you do if you don't experience the passage of time? Or what do you do if you don't experience sunrise and sunset the way human beings for almost all of human existence did? What if you are in a spaceship? What if you are in orbit? What if you are on another planet, so you're experiencing a sunrise and sunset that is different than planet Earth? So that was, I think, the question. Professor, did you ask it or did someone else ask it? I don't recall. You're muted. Hold on.
He's on mute. He's mute.
It was somebody else, but I asked, I gave an example of this problem in crossing the date line and in Arctic areas.
Yes.
Rabbi,
I think it was Bernie Hammer that answered.
Oh, doctor, yes. I apologize.
Yes.
So let me.
Can I add something?
Hold on, Ellie, you're a little garbled. Go ahead.
Please add something to the comments. So what happens in Alaska when there's no night? When there's no nighttime in Alaska? Yes. It's mostly daytime.
So hold on, I'm going to share the screen. Ellie, please do not look at your camera. Please don't look at your phone. I want you to drive safely. But I'm going to share the screen. I'll show you what I started putting together, and I'll take your. Actually, hold on. No, stop share. I'm going to share my screen.
The answer to your question, Rabbi, is clear. You ask your local Orthodox rabbi.
Oh,
doesn't matter what. Yeah.
Shabbos on Mars, based on a discussion by our Talmud Chabur. You thought Elon Musk had a hard time figuring out how to get us there. Well, we have a much harder time figuring out how to keep Yiddishkeit on Mars, and this is a portrayal of one of the Mars, how do you call it, rovers or whatever. Yes, Roberto.
I think that we exaggerate what's happening today, that it's so unusual. Imagine the first time they started to come across the Atlantic to America. For them, there were shilas that looked as difficult as ours.
Indeed, and there are parallels. So I'll show you some of the things I put together. A lot of what's here we already discussed, and a lot of what's here is being suggested and will be suggested. The question is, how do you observe Shabbos on Mars? Well, we start off by some important. So this is the image that came from the new how do you call it, James Webb telescope. This is not a. This is many galaxies apparently. This is an extremely zoomed out picture, never seen before by humanity. It's a little vague. I'm sure you've seen it. This was the first image that was released. Hashem, it said, we say in Tehillim, Hashem counts the stars and gives a name to each of them. So to Hashem, just to point out, this is no big deal. There are those who say Hashemayim Shemaim Hashem V'Aretz Nasam Livnei Adam, Heaven is for Hashem. The earth was given to mankind. The reality is, of course, that we say that Hashem is ever present on heaven and earth. But let's get back to our question or our issue. So many Jewish thinkers and fiction writers pondering about Jewish life on Mars. So you have a book called Do They Keep Kosher on Mars and Other Pressing Jewish Questions of Jewish Life. You can get this on Amazon. There was an Israeli writer who wrote a book called Martian Sands. I did not read it. But the premise of his story is they discovered a time traveler. Here, I put a review. Israeli fiction called, actually, Lavi Tidar describes a story of a time traveler, and they figure out how to, whatever. They figure out, it's actually an offensive premise, but basically a time traveler arrives before the Holocaust, and they figure out they can transport all the Jews in Hitler's area to Mars, where they start a new colony. Apparently it's humorous. Again, I think the premise, at least without reading it, sounds offensive, but it is what it is. By the way, it's anti-Semitic too, because that's what Hitler wanted. He originally said that if the Jews don't leave his country, then he'll exterminate them. So unfortunately, sending the Jews out of Nazi Germany is, in a sense, what Hitler Yamach Shemai V'Zichra said. But anyways, I didn't read the book, so I don't really have the right to criticize, but you have basically writers pondering the notion of Jews on Mars. There's also an account called Chabad of Mars. Go to Facebook, and someone designed a Twitter page. And so the first Chabad house on the red planet.
Is he raising funds, Rabbi? Is funds being raised?
No, this is a parody.
Okay.
It is a parody, but of course the famous joke that they say is that when we first land on, well, two jokes. First, when we first land on Mars, we'll see a structure and it's going to be a Chabad house. Okay, but the other joke is when they land on Mars, 9 Martians crowd around the aircraft, and the people think they're being attacked. So they open the door to have their first initial encounter, and they say, "Oh, we've been waiting for you. We need our 10th man for the minyan." So that's about Mars. But here's a serious question. If you're on Mars, you're not experiencing sunrise and sunset. So there is an analogy in our Gemara. The analogy is, of course, someone pointed it out, if one is traveling in the desert and they don't know, or they cannot determine the day that is Shabbos. So the Gemara discusses, what do you do? If you get lost, you get separated from your Shayara. We learned this in our Gemara. If you're traveling in the desert, you don't know when Shabbos is. Either you count 6 days and the 7th day is Shabbos, or the first day is Shabbos and then 6 days. The Gemara asks, and again, we learn this. What's the machloikas? Either we model after creation, 6 days of creation and the 7th day of Shabbos, or we model after Adam Harishan's experience. His first full day was Shabbos, and then he had 6 days. So maybe when people are on Mars, they just count they create their own system of Shabbos, 6 days and then Shabbos. What's the problem with that? You may recall the Gemara. It says that you only do Kedei Parnasasai. You're only allowed to work until you figure out what day is Shabbos, as much as is needed to subsist, which means that this is not an ideal arrangement, which means that you should not be flying off to Mars if you cannot figure out how to observe Shabbos properly. Now, maybe we'll say it's Pikuach Nefesh. Well, I understand. So maybe that would be the scenario then, according to this Gemara. There's a more fundamental question. Imagine that we do end up in Mars. And imagine no matter what, however we figure out when Shabbos is, we're going to have a problem. Where's Rebel? Rebel, you there? We're going to have a problem. One of the problems, Rebel, that became prevalent as world travel became more prevalent. Forget space, forget the new country. As the old world becomes more full. So there was a question asked to the Radvaz, Rav David Ibn Zimra. Happens to be, Rav David Ibn Zimra was the teacher of the Arizal. The Arizal was an orphan. He was born in Jerusalem to a Sephardic mother and an Ashkenazic father. And his father passes away. And his mother, I think, along with Arizal, maybe she sent him to live. His father passed away, and he's sent to live with his uncle, who I think the name was Ashkenazi, and they lived in Alexandria. No, I think it was Alexandria, I may be wrong. They go to Egypt, and one of his rebbes is the Radvaz, or David Ibn Zibra, one of the greatest poskim ever. And he has an interesting question in his Shalot Utshuvot. Sha'altu mimeni, I was asked, Odiach Dati, being in a Shabbos, can you tell me about Shabbos? There's a very, very vast distinction between when Shabbos happens to those in the East and those in the West. What's he describing here? Time zones. When you are in the East and when you are in the West, you're in a different time zone. And by extension, you have a different sunrise and sunset. The moment that to some folks is Shabbos, to others is weekday. Now, we're very familiar with this. You have family on the West Coast, or Reb Beryl was on the West Coast for Shabbos. Well, we know that when it's Shabbos here, it is not yet Shabbos for Reb Beryl, but Saturday night, we want to call Reb Beryl. You can't call him, it's still Shabbos. And even more extreme, we know that if you want to talk to your friend in Israel or Mishpach in Israel, we want to call Mark, we want to have Mark on our shir. We come to Shabbos morning, Friday morning rather, and Mark tells us it's almost Shabbos. How is that? Of course, because time zones, we experience Shabbos and Chol differently. Today, it's a very common thing. But in the time of the Radvaz, people really were becoming aware of this. And so they're asked, what's the deal? How does it work? And he gives a powerful and somewhat surprising answer. Anyone want to try to guess what the Radvaz is going to answer? How do you justify the fact that Jews experience Shabbos differently? Isn't it a mitzvah to the nation of Israel? Shouldn't we have to experience it at a single moment? How can we experience it at different times? Anyone want to take a stab at his?
It goes by where you are locally, because
where you're located.
by sunset.
So you're saying Shabbos is determined by sunrise and sunset. I understand that. But how is it just? This is like almost a hashkafa question. How can we make sense of the fact that Hashem would make a community-wide mitzvah for all of Klal Yisrael, and we aren't experiencing it in the same way? Isn't it a
by lighting Shabbos candles?
No, by observing Shabbos at different
No,
times.
He says everybody, God gave Shabbos to everybody wherever he lives.
So everyone has to observe Shabbos in their own time frame, sunrise and sunset. That is the fact. But here he's asking.
Shabbos has a personal element to it.
Oh, explain some more. Give me some more language. Help me out.
You have lachem all over the place in many.
Wherever
we're told that it should be for you. I guess off the top of my head.
Let me show you how you and the Radvaz are on the same page. I don't know how to highlight while I'm in the. Hold on, let me see. Pointer options, highlighter.
Rabbi, also, since Hashem provided us with people who could answer these kind of shilas when they come up, maybe Hashem will provide us with other people at that level to help us.
Indeed. So come take a look. Oops, I don't know how to undo it. Bear with me. Pointer. Let me get a pointer. All right, here we go. Teshuvah. This is a question that has perturbed, confounded many. I'm sorry, I'm going to tell you my opinion. Rabbi, listen carefully because I think what you said is what the Radvaz says. Shabbos is not a gift to a nation. It's a gift. It's a covenant to every individual Jew. Nimser l'kol echad miYisrael. Shenamar, here he brings a verse that I think Rabbi was trying to refer to. Ki oisi, Shabbos is a sign, beini, between me, ubeinechem, and between you. Just as every male member of Klal Yisrael has their own circumcision, there's no nationwide circumcision, and everyone has a bris at their own time in their own place, depending on their birth. Similarly, Shabbos is more of an individual thing than a communal thing. Being that Shabbos has been given to every person where they are. I'm sorry, wherever he is, he counts 6 days. At the end of 6 days, he makes himself Shabbos. And this is how we recall the creation. And if you're not going to accept my answer, he says, well, in reality, even in Israel, there are different zmanim. We learned in the Gemara that the Jews of Tiberias bring in Shabbos early and the people on the mountains take it in later. Remember that? Let me just skip, because that's what he says over here. Even more profoundly, the Gemara says, a person who's in the desert, and he doesn't know when Shabbos is, what does he do? The Gemara describes how a person can have an individual Shabbos that is truly not aligned with anyone else on planet Earth. And he makes Kiddush and Havdalah. Although he tries to limit the amount of Chilul Shabbos, the amount of Malacha he does, because he doesn't know when Shabbos is. That's only because he's not sure. Basically, although there are downsides to this analogy of the person that's lost, what we do learn from here is every Jew is incumbent upon each Jew to individually celebrate, experience, and mark Shabbos, each individual reflective of his locale. Teda. And how do I prove that this is actually a real Shabbos? Because a wanderer who's lost and he does malacha, when he arrives back home and he discovers that he was actually observing Shabbos wrong, he needs not to bring any carbon. Wow. Similarly, let me skip that. Elo Shuyis Bar Tziva, as the Shabbos Hashem commanded. Hashem knew. And Rebbe, I think this is also what you said. Hashem knew that human beings, humanity, and Jewish people will be dispersed across the entire globe via Bnei Mercha Gadol, and it'll be a vast distance. And the same thing applies to the holidays, that we're observing holidays at different hours. And then he asks another question. There's a machlokes about what the cutoff line is. What is how do you call it? The prime meridian, is that what we call it? What is the line? Is it Greenwich time, or is it Jerusalem?
Rabbi, just thinking about this, the bigger problem is, what is a day on Mars?
Exactly. So how do you quantify time? So for the first things first.
Rabbi, in this discussion of making Shabbos for oneself, there is no reference to sunrise and sunset. So ultimately one might say, oh, well, the sun rises who knows when. I make Shabbos from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 5 o'clock in the next day, and sunrise and sunset be damned. Is it
so, Professor,
possible?
You're asking, now that we're giving utter flexibility and latitude to the individual, maybe it entirely discounts the idea of sunrise and sunset, right?
Yeah.
So the reality is that's not what we're saying. For whatever reason at this point, and it's a very important question that we're going to ask in a moment, right now what we're saying is, we know Shabbos is the seventh day. What is the day? Sunrise and sunset. But is it possible that we're not going to all be aligned? Maybe we'll have different days.
Sunset and sunrise.
Sorry, sunset and sunrise, correct. Well, no, sunset to sunset. Or, sunset is a night and sunrise is a day. Okay. At this point, all we've said is that it's possible for there to be a lack of alignment to the precise moment. And then in his analysis, it's even plausible that we could have 2 different days that are Shabbos, and somehow both would be considered authentic and accurate. This doesn't give us an answer, but it is possible that based on this, the Radvaz would say, you know what, if you're on Mars, you'll observe sunrise, sunset 6 times. The 7th day will be Shabbos. Now, what's the problem with this? The problem with this is that Mars and Earth, and I told you this is still under development. We need a few more slides to show that Mars and Earth do not have exactly the same solar year, nor do they have the same length of days. So on planet Earth, a day is 24 hours of 60 minutes of 60 seconds. On Mars, who knows? Alan, do you happen to know the time of a Martian day?
No.
A Martian day, if I'm not mistaken, is 24 hours and 37 minutes. 24 hours and 37 minutes, which means that a Martian day is a little bit longer, only 37 minutes longer. But at the end of a week, how many minutes longer is that, Mark?
Let's see. 37 times 7.
9. It's 4 hours and a fraction off. That's a week. And so after a month, we're going to be 16.
259 minutes.
Right. So after a month, we're going to be 16 hours off. And in short order, Shabbos on Mars and Shabbos on Earth, if we were just going to follow the solar, a day and a night, we're going to end up totally not aligned. Based on reading of the Radvaz, is that a problem?
Rabbi, not really. Not really.
Not really a problem?
No.
Why not?
Because the purpose of Shabbos is to rest one of those 7 days, whatever they happen to be.
Rebel, we'd say in Yiddish, you're taking breite places, broad shoulders, to make such a weighty decision.
No, but really, what are the rules of Shabbos? 6 days work, 1 day not. That's the whole purpose.
But is it any day? Or is it the 7th day on planet Earth?
If you're going to work 24 hours and 30 minutes every day, then one of those things, whatever they are, you take off every 7. I mean, the question of Yom Tov and Yom Kippur is more complicated, but Shabbos is basically to set aside 1/7 of the time you work.
It is reasonable to make your assertion based on a reading of a possible reading of the Radvaz. I could not tell you with certainty that the Radvaz would apply this principle to Mars, because I don't know if the Radvaz would say that sunrise and sunset on Mars is considered a day, or does it need to be on planet Earth? I don't know. But
Rabbi, a more practical question. If nobody works on Mars, how do you rest?
Well, we know that Shabbos is even for those.
You fly, you float. You can just float.
Even here, we have regular time and then Rabbeinu Tam time.
Right.
So you have you have differences in times here too.
Well, that's what the Radvaz is saying. But all right. So you're right, but that's all the Hachmir. We're only adding to Shabbos. But what about Lekula? So that's the question. We didn't give an answer, but Rebel did a very good job, in my opinion, summarizing a possible inference from the Radvaz that Mars would be on its own track. And you know what? We wouldn't be perturbed. Let the Martians have their own Shabbos. By the way, a lot of the science fiction books and shows, the premise of Martians being aliens starts with the fact that they were actually from planet Earth. Over lengthy passages of time, they developed into their own civilization. And so we can have a situation where we might go to Mars and we'll meet people that are Jewish Martians. And 4,000 years ago, we're going to use the Jewish Zmanim, a group of people in the time of the Tower of Babel managed to climb up to the top of the tower, and they shot off a rocket and they landed on Mars and they built a civilization. Who knows? Well, they probably weren't Jewish then. Anyways, the question we have now continues to an obvious extension, which is if you're in space, suppose we reject the Martian Shkia and Zricha. Suppose we reject using sunrise and sunset on Mars as an effective paradigm. Well, then how do we figure out when Shabbos starts and finishes? If there's no sunrise, there's no Earth sunrise or Earth sunset. So this is actually a question that has a lot of precedent, and a few of our scholars referenced it in the Chabura, which is, what if you live in a place where there is no sunrise or sunset? And so we have over here are two images which purport to be, this is the midnight sun, and this is daytime in somewhere in the polar region. So you have
Rabbi,
places
you
on
forgot
Earth.
one thing.
Go
You
ahead.
can't light Shabbos candles on Mars.
Why not?
There's no atmosphere there.
Well, there's going to be an artificial atmosphere. What do you mean?
No, there's not.
We're going to be living in domes or underground.
Alan, there's special Martian candles.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Are there Mars candy bars? Are they kosher? Something.
So if you're a Jewish traveler,
I think
or
you
let's
can
say you
do
live
it
in St.
even on
Petersburg.
an electric, in a case of emergency, you can do it on electric.
Can't
Let's say
turn
you
on
live
the
in St.
electricity.
Petersburg. So I believe St. Petersburg, which was once called Leningrad, a number of days a year, I don't know precisely how many, there is no sunset. And the number of days a year,
Northern Canada,
Northern
Canada, the same thing.
right?
This is always exaggeration. There is sunset, but it's so late that it becomes very difficult for people to handle all daily life on Shabbos that ends so ridiculously like 11 o'clock at night.
Okay.
But I think that the solution that the whole business with Mars is, from the Torah perspective, is somewhat overkill, because Mars was created later than the Earth, like on the fourth day, on the third day, and hence all this Shabbos thing doesn't apply to this place.
Why?
Because there is no, when there was seventh day on the Earth, it was only fourth day or third day on Mars.
But why are you supposing that the Jewish covenant with Hashem that's based on planet Earth would change when you get onto Mars?
Because Mars didn't exist at the time of the world creation, and hence the statement that the creation was over and the world was complete, and hence the Shabbos starts. It's the seventh day, but on Mars it wasn't the seventh day. It was only like third day. That is, whoever finds himself on Mars should use the time, the Earth time of his or her origin, and that solves the problem.
So what you're saying is, if you use the Earth time, you'll be all right. But if you're going to try to follow Mars time, you're saying then you're going to have to follow the Mars premise. Now, I'm not certain if I agree or disagree about Mars being created at a different time. I know science talks about the expansion of the universe, and so maybe Mars came before or after, or its proximity to the sun represents. But if you read the creation narrative, so Hashem created the stars and constellations and planets on the Yom Revi'i, right? On the fourth day.
Yeah.
So you're saying from that sense, if Mars is created on the fourth day, so it only had 3 days of creation.
So maybe we should start on Mars. We should start counting 7 days from the fourth day of Earth.
So
Maybe.
so I'll tell you the truth. Go ahead, doctor.
I think there's a more basic philosophical issue here. And that is, if Hashem created the world with Earth, does that, and has dominion over everything that happens there, does it mean that if things were created or that we are aware of creation afterwards, that's a different book and a different story? And that's what the professor seems to be suggesting, but it's inconsistent with what we do regarding other things that happened that weren't in existence on Earth, new plants, new animals that weren't written about in the Torah. We still feel that we have to follow or find a way of fitting it into the laws of the Torah that was set down beforehand. Because if not, it's an interesting concept.
I don't.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't believe that the principles of Torah would change on Mars. The Torah is a covenant that is between the Jewish people, and it was premised on the giving of Torah Mount Sinai. So I don't think that would change. But Professor, you said that if I think I understand your question. You're not really saying that a Jew on Mars isn't bound to Torah. You're just saying that a Jew on Mars needs to be tethered to the Earth story in order to authentically preserve the tradition. I hear you, and you are not alone.
Rabbi, can I add something?
Go ahead.
I heard this somewhere. Could there be another planet that we have just like Earth living that we don't even know about somewhere in the world?
You want to know if the Torah could fathom another planet with life on it?
Yeah, millions of other places away. Another
You're
planet that
asking
we
if
don't
this
even know
creates, if this would create a crisis of faith. If we would discover a planet, let's say the James Webb's telescope will be searching, and all of a sudden they'll find Anshe Beth. I don't know, Anshe Beth Pluto. No.
Could there be another world where life exists?
So I'll tell you, I don't know what Judaism supposes. I will tell you. Okay, I think we're going to end up doing this entire. If anyone wants me to stop now and we'll go back to the Gemara, please let me know. I don't want to disappoint anyone.
If anyone wants to bring you down to earth.
Or does anyone here mind if we'll just go to the end of this presentation?
All
right.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll tell you a story. Professor Velvel Green was a secular Yiddishist type person living in Minnesota, a big macher in town, and he was a virologist, I believe, who worked for NASA. And the project they were thinking about then was life in outer space. This is in the 60s during when this was the center of our interest, scientific interest during the space race. And he became close to the Chabad Shaliach there, and he ends up becoming pretty religious. And he begins a lengthy correspondence with the Rebbe, some many very interesting letters and stories, and it's all been recorded and there's books about it. But at some point, he tells the Rebbe, listen, I am working for NASA. We are researching and investigating life in outer space. And is that perhaps inconsistent with being an observant Jew? And should I stop? And the Rebbe told him, do not stop. To suppose that there cannot be life in outer space is to limit Hashem's ability, something to that effect. So that doesn't say that we anticipate it, the Torah anticipates it or doesn't anticipate it, but I don't think it would be, it would create a conflict for Jewish belief. So let me zip through the rest. So the question is, what happens? How does Shabbos start? How do you have Shabbos if there is no sunrise and sunset? And yes, on the polar regions, there are places that the sun doesn't rise, the sun doesn't set. Places in Alaska, certain places in maybe Greenland, but again, in the polar regions. So this is not a new question. Since human beings figured out that they could travel to places where there is no sunrise and sunset, there have been questions. So the first opinion I didn't, again, it's still under development. So for some reason, I see it didn't, that slide isn't here, but there was a German rabbi, and I don't recall his name at the moment. And there's a letter that he wrote to his son wrote to him saying, Dad, I want to go on an expedition. We're going hunting, whale hunting. And apparently, unfortunately, or whatever, it was a big industry and it was very profitable. And he wanted to go on one of these expeditions and catch some whales. And his whales are not kosher, by the way. But he asked his father, how do I observe Shabbos if I go to a place in the polar, zone where there's no night? I think it was because he was traveling in the summer.
Or Patagonia.
I'm sorry?
I said, or Patagonia.
Yeah.
The whales. Yeah.
Yeah. And his father tells him, my son, if you actually want to be a good Jew, you'll cancel your trip because it's very complicated to figure out how Shabbos should work and when Shabbos is, so don't go there. And so that reflects a very defensive, conservative approach, cautious approach. This is a complicated question. It's never been confronted. It's never been contended with before. There's no simple answer. So avoid it. If we're going to apply it to traveling to Mars, you might say, okay, maybe there is an opinion. You'll ask your rabbi, I want to go to Mars. How do I observe Shabbos? And the rabbi might say, listen, you want to keep Shabbos or you want to go to Mars? They can't really work together because how do you figure it out? And especially because, at least in the initial stages, everyone that's going to be going to Mars is going to probably have jobs to play in the maintenance and work. And how are you going to be able to get off from all malacha in Mars? Well, but suppose Elon Musk or whoever ends up sending human beings to Mars wants to have a representative group and he's willing to accommodate all of your Shabbos concerns. And suppose the rabbis will weigh this issue. And by the way, hopefully what's going to happen is Mashiach will come and then space exploration will continue and we'll present this Shiloh to the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin will be empowered to make a decisive halachic determination about Shabbos on Mars, and whatever they determine, that will be the halacha. That will be, but until then, we have a problem. And so there's another opinion, a famous opinion of one of the great scholars and also eccentric, somewhat controversial Chachamim, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, in his work called Moroxia. He's very famous. He was a very prolific writer, and he also is very open in his writing. So there's different things that you wouldn't see typically in rabbinic literature that you'll find in his writings. Personal anecdotes and personal animus and feelings. He was famously, was a hunter for Sabbatean, people that held on to Sabbatean belief. And he was not afraid to enter controversy, take people on. But he was also a prolific, brilliant scholar. And he was asked this question. And this is a paraphrasing of what he writes that I found online. So we'll have to, I found the original source, but it was a PDF. I couldn't copy the old typeset. It is necessary to reflect on the manner in which those who dwell and travel in these lands near the poles should conduct themselves, how you experience Shabbos. So he writes, it would appear to me that you should count 7 equal days of 24 hours of our equal hours, calculating from the day that one arrived there. So he basically seems to say, similar-ish to the Radvaz, that a day, a sunrise and sunset, it doesn't exist. It's a 24-hour period. And it seems like, again, we have to read his original text to understand, but there is some kind of inventive dynamic where you establish, this is probably based on the Gemara that we read, the Gemara that talks about a person establishing their own Shabbos. If you don't know when Shabbos is, well, then you make up a Shabbos. Well, what if it's not that you don't know, it can't be known because there is no sunrise and sunset. So it appears like he says that you'll establish 7 24-hour units of time and you'll establish a Shabbos. Probably what he means to say is that when you arrive there on Monday, when is sunrise and sunset on Monday, you'll do 6 p.m. When is sunrise? 6 p.m. So I don't think he's saying that you'll have a Shabbos on a Tuesday, but I think he's saying Shabbos will commence and close out at an established time of sunrise and sunset. Again, a lot more reading.
It's more complex than that because we are discussing traveling, but this Shua combines together dwelling and traveling. With traveling, it's clear. You arrive, you know when you arrive. But if you dwell there, if you are born there, that's a totally different ball game.
So you're saying going on a short trip and a lifetime is different?
Yeah, yes.
I thought you were saying
one is born there.
Rabbi,
hold on. Professor, why is it different?
Because for the traveler, there always exists a starting point, a base point. He knows when he arrived, unless of course there was a snowstorm for several days and he didn't have a watch and he lost the knowledge of time. But basically the case of traveling is the issue of arriving. When did you arrive?
Right, but again, I think what he's saying is you arrive on Tuesday. Well, now there's no sunset, but Tuesday,
yeah, you count from Tuesday.
Yeah, and then Wednesday. Yeah, okay, yeah, it's true. Again, we have to really read his.
I have a different problem. The way I look at it, creation, Shabbos is not. It's not man-centric. It's creation-centric.
Right.
Because Adam Arishon was created on the 6th day. He didn't wait 7 days. He had Shabbos the next day.
I don't think. I know that it sounds like we're saying that you invent your own schedule. I don't think that's actually what's going on. What I believe what is happening is that you arrive on Tuesday, but Tuesday has no endpoint halachically because the sun never sets. Well, you will create an artificial conceptual sunset, and then 12 hours later, you will have an imagined sunrise, and then you'll just keep that calendar. So, meaning in the secular world, we don't have a problem going from Tuesday to Wednesday. Tuesday finishes and Wednesday comes. But halachic day is a sunrise and a sunset. So I believe what he's saying is from the moment you arrive, you will end your Tuesday and become Wednesday by a determined 24-hour unit. I believe that's what he's saying. I may be wrong.
Shouldn't you use a time that's related to the area near the closest area nearby that actually?
You're
has the
making
sun-
another proposal based on something that you know, but why would you assume that?
Rabbi, it might be much more simple. You come there, you find a Jewish community, you go to their calendar.
Is there a Jewish community on the North Pole?
As much as maybe there's probably a Chabad guy starting out there.
So obviously we're talking about that there isn't a Jewish community, and I'll go a step further. When that Jewish community was first founded, how did they figure it out? The first person that arrived there had this question. And so that's his proposal. And at this time, I think it was more hypothetical. You didn't really have full-time settlements. This is in the beginning of the exploration of the extreme poles and distances of planet Earth. That's his proposal. There's also a famous commentator on the Mishnah called the Tiferes Yisrael, Rabbi Yisrael Lipschitz. And he gave an answer which is, I think, more familiar and has entered more into the halachic conversation. And this is, I believe, based on this is the psak about a Jew who's in orbit. The traveler, again, this is also paraphrasing. I couldn't figure out how to put the Hebrew text into the traveler should adapt the clock of the place from which he departed. Makom sheyaza misham, the place that he leaves. And so this is actually what happens for astronauts, I believe, when they asked, because we've had, I think, between 9 and 14 Jewish astronauts. Most of them, I don't think any of them were strictly Shomer Shabbos, but there were some that were sympathetic or interested or wanted to honor Shabbos in one way or another, making Kiddush. And they were advised to reflect this psak, I believe, which is you follow the place that you left, and that's how you determine the beginning and the end of a day. So, you know, the joke about the guy, the Jew, I think someone shared it here. The rabbi goes into orbit for the first time, and he comes back, and they want to ask him how it is, and he looks utterly disheveled, and his tzitzis are flying all over, and his beard is unkempt if he had a beard, and he looks terrible. And they ask him, Rabbi, what's wrong? He says, "Oh, every 90 minutes, Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv. I never had a moment to breathe, a moment to rest." So, how do we avoid every 90 minutes being Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv? Because if you think about it, the space station, or if you're in a shuttle in orbit, you circle the Earth every 90 minutes. Well, essentially every 45 minutes you have day and night. So this is how you would avoid that, by following and setting your clock and following the zmanim from the place that you depart. So if you're an astronaut and you fly from Cape Canaveral, what you'll do is you'll ask Chabad of Cape Canaveral, or what do they call it? There is Chabad there, the Space Coast. Yeah. About a Space Coast, to ask Rabbi Kanaka for his calendar, and you'll pin it up in your quarters, and that's how you'll practice Shabbos based on your watch, which is set to Cape Canaveral time, or maybe Houston time. But
Rabbi,
yes,
amongst the many marathons that I ran, one marathon I ran was in the north.
Okay.
Very, very far north. It was the northernmost tip of Baffin Island. We ran it in the summer. It was July 1st. And the next day, we had such a snowstorm there that the airplane couldn't come to take us home. So we were stranded there for a week. But the nights in the summer they're not bright, they're dim. There's a tremendous big cloud cover. And in the winter, it's not pitch black all the time. I spoke to a lot of the Inuits, and at night, it's not pitch black all the time. It's black from let's say midnight to 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning, and then it gets a little lighter. People can walk around. So they don't have lights.
It's kind of like an hour or two before sunset, or an hour before it gets darker.
Yeah,
the sun is not shining in the sky because the sun has dipped, but it just wasn't fully set. So hold on,
That's right.
Baffin Island, what is the name of the, is Baffin Island part of one of the provinces?
Baffin Island runs along, no, Baffin Island runs along Greenland. And I think it goes a little further north than Greenland.
Okay,
So we were maybe 800 miles from the North Pole.
so is that
1,000 miles,
So what is it?
maybe
Which
1,000
province?
miles.
Is it part, it's not part of a province? It's just,
It's still Quebec.
it is?
Yeah. And
Oh,
it
wow.
still had the same area code as Montreal.
All right, sounds interesting. All right, so he says you set your time based on the place that you embark. Fascinating problem. Let's say one person leaves from here. He actually puts it in the notes over here. A traveler who leaves from England and another one travels from America. They might have different hours because they're following the port that they embarked from. And so this is a problem with his explanation, which brings to another explanation, which I didn't include here, which is, I think, what Reb Beryl was trying to say, which is you find the closest Jewish community, whatever the closest Jewish community is, you'll follow their Zmanim. But that's not what was suggested over here.
From a tradition-
Rabbi,
from
I have a
from-
question.
Yes?
So if we're following, which we have to follow 6 days work, 7-day rest, and this is what we got to do. So maybe to avoid, not saying Montreal, not saying Canada, not saying Florida, not saying all these places where the weather is bad or there's hurricanes or there's issues, why not the Jews go to an area where less avoidant of all these issues to observe the Shabbos the right way?
So you're asking, why would we go put ourselves into a position where we'll have a question?
Yes.
That was the first opinion we cited, where the rabbi said, don't go there. You're going to have a shaila. But listen, if Jews would attempt to always avoid shailas, we'd be dead. Because the reason why we are dispersed is usually not by our will, but because of different kinds of tsuris and persecutions. So most German Jews arrived in America in the middle 1800s because they were escaping persecution. And most Russian Jews arrived in the 1890s to the 1910s because they were escaping pogroms and the sort. And then you have the Jews who came after, either before the war, knowing that trouble was looming, or we had the immigrants who arrived, survivors who arrived after the war. All of them, it wasn't that they wished to leave their country, their place of origin. The place of origin essentially gave them no choice. And so Jews don't have the luxury of taking the path of least halachic resistance. Jewish living means having great chachamim who have to figure out and contend with all these questions. And usually consensus develops over time. And initially you will have, so basically the first space mission to Mars will probably have 3 different minyanim. You'll have like the Sephardic minyan that follows their posek, which keeps Shabbos like who knows what. And then you'll have the Litvaks, which will have a totally different way of keeping Shabbos. And then you have the Hasidim, which will just do Rabbeinu Tam Shkia all, you know.
Rabbi, there's all kinds of problems other than Shabbos. How are you going to stand for Kedusha when there's no gravity?
That's the least of problems. But yes, there's kashrus. There's what else is there? Can you include a Martian for a minyan? Do the Martians?
I can tell you one thing, Rabbi. Not too many
It's the Jewish
Chavrusas
part,
are
yeah.
struggling with this.
So I just want to show you these are rejected theories. Now the interesting thing, if there's a lot of material both within halachic Orthodox journals, but this is such an interesting topic. You'll find also Reform and Conservative, and so
I have a question. Traditionally, from a tradition point of view, when did we really start counting for the Shabbos? I mean, I understand for Shabbos was 7
What do you
days of creation, but do we have any recording of when we started counting?
of course,
7 days?
sunset is Shabbos. It's in the Gemara. Sunrise.
I'm not talking about sunrise. Which day?
Oh, you want to know how do we know that
Go
Shabbos?
from
Yeah,
previous
I mean
hour.
today. I mean, I understand it's the seventh day after creation, but do we really know?
So you're
which
saying
day-
maybe we made a mistake?
Well, I don't know if we made a mistake, but that's the point. You take a day.
I don't know.
At what point did we start counting?
I think we've been counting since the beginning of Jewish Shabbos.
Of what is it? I mean, do we have any recording? Anybody?
2,449 years ago? No, I'm mixing it up. No, I'm sorry. 3,334, 35 years, I think, is Matan Torah. I'll tell you this:
Jewish.
Jewish scholarship does a really incredible job tracing and preserving and recording time for a very long time. But it's a good question. You want to know where is the first, like,
even at that, the discrepancy.
you want to know, is there a Persian calendar marked off with the words Jewish Sabbath? Or is
Right.
there a Babylonian tablet that says on Tuesday, according to Babylonian whatever, which is the Jewish Shabbat? I don't know if such a thing exists, although I wouldn't be surprised if they would uncover it. But I'll tell you what, the good thing, and one of the things that, and I want to go through these last few theories, and it's already essentially 10:30 here. One of the things that archaeologists do nowadays is that we can go back in time in our understanding of what the stars and the constellations and the astronomy looked like. And so we have different historic events where people recorded, oh, there were 4 planets in the sky and they looked like X. And we can reverse engineer and determine when in that approximate era would there have been 4 planets in the sky. And we can with great certainty determine what date it was. And it's really reimagining a lot of the different parts of history, including, so it's plausible that we could find some kind of archaeological / astronomic clue that would help us out, but I'm not aware of that. But I just want to give in closing, if you're in a place and you're in the polls, or if you are, well, let's talk about the polls. So looking around, there's a theory that says, hold on, a day in halacha is a sunrise and a sunset. So if the sun only rises, if the sun is up for 6 months and down for 6 months, assuming that's the way it is, well, then maybe every year is a day, and every 7th year you have to keep Shabbos for a year. Obviously, this is not a seriously entertained position, but Rabbi Bleich, who writes a fascinating article in one of the halachic journals, proposes such an idea. Of course, it would mean very little davening, right? You only have to, you'll only be davening 3 times a year. And obviously, this would only have to put on tefillin 1 time. This is not a serious proposal, but just something interesting to entertain. There are those who say, listen, Shabbos is given in an area where you have sunrise and sunset. Maybe there's no sunrise and sunset. There should be no Shabbos. Or more particularly on Mars. Mars is out of this system of the Torah was given on Earth. If you're not on Earth, maybe you don't have to keep Shabbos. That's also not a serious proposal. A more serious proposal for the North Pole, less helpful about Mars, is something that Alan mentioned, which is, although the sun doesn't totally set, the sun does dip to its lowest point. And so we could kind of figure out at some point when it dips low enough, we'll say, oh, this is sunset. And when it comes back up, we could say it's sunrise. So maybe you have an hour or 2 of night and a longer day, and that would allow you the opportunity to have halachic zmanim, notwithstanding the complexity of it. And so those are some of the ideas, some of the theories that we consider. Again, it's a very, very broad, complex, fascinating topic. And I just want to be clear, we really, really haven't done justice to the breadth of it. This is more just a tease or a taste of some of the conversations, some of the questions, and some of the sources that scholars will have to use if we really want to figure out Shabbos on Mars. My dear friends, I have good news.
Wasn't Adam born on Shabbos?
Hold on. I have good news. We're not going to be the halachic body that makes this determination. I could imagine the chief rabbi, the Rabbanut of Israel. I can imagine the Eidach Haredis giving an opinion. Maybe London Bezdin, or maybe the RCA. But there are august halachic bodies that I'm sure, when it becomes relevant, will truly weigh in on these topics, and they'll dig deep into the Gemara, into the Poskim, into the Shulchan Aruch, and I'm confident that a proposal will come up. And as I mentioned, probably there'll be a few proposals, and it'll take time for one of them to become the prevailing Jewish tradition. Or, as I said, you'll have 3 shuls on Mars, not the one you don't step into. Well, yeah, but you'll have, the people who follow this psak, and the people that follow this psak, and the few people, whatever, and then you'll have the JCC or Hillel, where everyone will kind of figure out how to coexist. My dear friends, the main thing is we should be zocha, the arrival of Mashiach, and
Right.
We'll have a Sanhedrin and then we'll have a conclusive answer. So this was a small presentation based on the conversation, the Gemara shir I shared last night, and I share it with you. With Hashem's help, we'll develop it further. I'm sorry?
Beautiful. It's very nice. It's a great topic.
Yasher koyach tizkor mitzvot. And
Rabbi, I sent you something. If you have time, just look into it. It's about water. What water does. I was in my shul last week, and the rabbi spoke about water. That if you talk to the water respectfully, there's molecules in the water. This guy wrote his whole life about water. That if
you're saying water picks up the wavelengths of of our speech, and it reflects differently depending on the intensity of our tone.
That's one thing, but also with water, if you say something bad to the water, it kills the molecule cells. And you have to see what I sent you.
I'll take a look. It sounds surprising.
Yeah.
Sounds
the rabbi
shocking.
Spoke about it this week, and it was beautiful. And I think this is a topic maybe we'll bring up one day during the class. But you have to look into it. It was beautiful.
All right. Thank you so much. Folks, I want to thank you for bearing with me. Tomorrow, we're going to go back into the actual text of the Gemara. So I hope no one holds this against me. I didn't realize we were taking a whole hour, but thank you all so much. And we'll see what else is born out of our Gemara. Dr. Hammer, you're muted. No, you're muted. Doctor, we don't hear you.
You may not be talking to us.
Well, then
That's one quick thing. On the lovely presentation, which I found very interesting, you should put your name on it and the Chabad, and whatever, your name, and an asterisk next to Chabura and the name of the people in the Chabura. Why? Just like you're looking, maybe they'll find when it started counting Shabbos. In a few thousand years from now, when somebody goes to whatever they're going to call Wikipedia then, and they find something, and there are no names attached to it, just says Chabura, they'll have no idea who you are, where it's from, and someone will say, oh, my great grandfather used to be part of this. Wow.
Okay, I will do that. For that.
Somebody
Listen, you never
said-
know. There's going to be
Somebody
a scholarly
some-
article on the topic of the way Jews ponder this question. And yeah, you're right. This might be an entry in the.
Right.
Somebody thinks we say here, I don't know if we want to be attributable.
Spaced out has taken on a whole new meaning.
All right, thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day. We'll see everyone tomorrow. Be'ezer Hashem.
Take care.
And we'll be tomorrow. We're going to learn the Gemara inside.
Let's go.
Take care. Bye.